Hello. Okay. Let's see. Today we're going to start on Mem Hey Amud Aleph. Tana Reb Chia Bar Yosef Kamed Reb Yochanan. It's in middle of the wide lines in a traditional Gemara. Okay, that's 45a. We thank Hashem that we're able to learn Torah every day. In the schus of our learning, we should have the base of Mikdash. So it starts off with halacha and shchita. It says Tani Reb Chia Bar Yosef Kamed Reb Yochanan. Reb Chia Bar Yosef, the famous student of Rabbi Yochanan was Reb Chia Bar Abba. This is Reb Chia Bar Yosef. He makes a statement in front of Rabbi Yochanan. He says, "Kol hatzav v'kula kasher l'shchita." The whole neck is kasher v'shchita. There goes the giraffe theory. So how come we don't need giraffe? So we don't know where to shecht it. Well, that wouldn't make a difference. The whole neck is kasher. On the contrary, there's so much more room to shech. You have the whole neck. What's the whole neck? It says mitabas gedola ad kanfei reya hatachtaina. So it sort of has the animal hanging upside down. So mitabas gedola kanfei reya tachtaina. The lungs the lungs, if the animal would be hanging upside down, then the upper lobes of the lungs would be the thinner ones. Now it's the bottom because it's hanging upside down. So the head is down. So which we would have called the upper part of the lungs is now the bottom part of the lungs. So you can shecht from tabasa gedayla, which we said that was the top of the trachea, until the wings of the lungs. So all the way down the trachea, the whole neck. Amar Rava, Tachtein Shelyan, Rava explains that when we say the lower lobes of the lungs, we actually mean the upper lobes of the lungs, because we're talking about when the animal's upside down. Shani Aimer says, I say, Kol Shapeshetis Tavara Vroya Blavach Leitenis. You see, if it stretches its neck out longer, then the trachea is going to be extended. The more it stretches out, the more it's going to extend. So he said, but it can't hurt itself. An animal all the time, it stretches down, it eats the grass, it stretches out, but it can't do it in a way that would be hurting. If you would stretch it too much and then shecht on the very bottom, then you're cutting too low on the neck. Even though it's still the neck, but because you stretched it, so then it's actually too low. So then it says like this: Boy Rab Chanina, Bitamer Rab Chananya. Oh, that's always a question over there. It's Rabbi Chanina ben Shadin or Rabbi Chananya ben Shadin. So anyway, apparently it's two different people. Not ben Shadin, but the name. There's a Rab Chanina and a Rab Chananya. He says Ansa Atzma Mahu. I know that if you force the animal to stretch its neck out and you shecht very low down, that would be problematic. But let's say it did it on its own. Would that still be considered its natural position? Because it did it on its own. Teku, we don't have an answer to that. Yosef, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish are sitting. Nafak Milsa Mibinayo, and the following halacha came out. Anas b'simanim v'shachat psula. Anas b'simanim would mean the case that we're talking about, where it stretched it too far, and then it shechted in that lower area. What would be the halacha? We say psula, it's possible. Nikiv hakana lamata min achaza nidan kereya. There's a difference between a puncture to the lungs or a puncture to the trachea, even though it's both ends up in the same place. But a hole in the lungs means that it's is a treifa, even a small puncture, and a hole in the trachea is not. It's not a treifa. It has to be severed majority. So you say like this: what about the very lowest part of the trachea as it's entering into the area of the lungs? Is that considered the lungs, or is that considered the trachea? That would be a big nafkamina if it's punctured. So it says if it's lamata min achaz and nidin kareya. But if it's below the chest area, considered the lungs, even though it's still the kana. Even though when you look at it, it's the kana. If you don't look at everything that's around it, it would be just a piece of the kana. Nevertheless, it has the halacha of b'mashu. Tana Rabbanon, it was taught in a brayse. Okay, this is a question about giving. There's certain parts of the animal have to be given to the kayan. So one of them is the chest, right? Chaza v'shaik, given to the kayan. Israel Chaim Keva is given to the kayan. The chazav v'shaik on a shlamim is given to a kayan by a shlamim. So it says, which part is the chest that's given? It says zerayas akarka. It's the part that sees the ground. Lamata adatzavar, from below until the neck. Adatzavar. I mean, arayas akarka lamata adatzavar lamayla. Ad hakeres. Chaytach states lois mishtei defanas helach velach v'zeu chazanit l'kain. Let me see if they have a picture here. No, there's no picture, but they say it's the section that faces the ground. The ribs extend outward from the spine and encompass the chest area on the sides. They connect over the chest through cartilaginous extensions. Rashi seems to understand that in removing the breast, one should not damage the ribs at all, taking only the fat covering the cartilage. Alternatively, the Meiri explains that one should cut off the ventral part of the ribs as well, since it faces the ground. So what we're talking about here is not the ribbed area on the sides. Just, that's what it means, faces the ground, means only the very front of the animal. And lengthwise, it's below, this is talking about the animals hanging from the legs until the neck, and above until the rumen. So below until the neck, because it's hanging down till the neck and up until the stomach. And then you take off the two smallest ribs on the top, like the shoulder. What's this called? The neck bone. Up by the neck bone, you take off the. That's what's given to the kayan. Okay. So we say zeu chazanit l'kainim. Nikav krim shamaya. We're talking about the meninges. This is the membrane that's in the skull. If it's punctured, then it's a treifa. Sounds like this. Rav Shmuel Damri Tavayo, Rav and Shmuel both say karma ilah afagav le'inkiv tata. The main concern here is there's two meninges. What's the Dr. Stein, is there a name for them? A and B.
The two meninges covering the lung?
No, meninges covering the brain.
The epidural, I forget.
Okay.
I think it's epidural.
One of them is the outer one and then the inner one. The outer one and the inner one. So the outer one, which means encompassing the inner one as well, that's the main one. Apparently the inner one is very close to the brain, and it's almost like could look like part of the brain. Well, Rav and Shmuel both say that the main issue is the outer one. That's already a treifa, even if the inner one isn't punctured. The other opinion says there is an opinion here that says that they said that you need both to be punctured for it to be a treifa. Amar Shmuel bar Nachmeni v'simanach. Want to remember this? Chaysa de matnach be'maicha. It's the sac that contains the brain. Why is that a good siman? There's a siman for the outer one. So the siman is like this. The word chaysa, that means a sac, means the life. The life is dependent on chaysa. It's a pun on the word chaysa. It means a sac, and it also means that the life is dependent on it, like chay. Very nice. Amar Rav Chanan Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Rav Chanan says in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. We had him already a few times in Ilchos Shefes before we had Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmeni in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. We had Rabbi Chanan named Rabbi Shua ben Levi also once. was quite recent. Anyway, over here he says, "Kenegdei bebeitzim nicker." Apparently, the membranes in the brain are not so recognizable. The lower one isn't so recognizable. But if you look at the testicles, then besides for the sac, but inside the testicles, there would also be two membranes. One, there's an outer one and an inner one. And apparently over there, it's more recognizable, the inner one, that it's a separate membrane. I'm Reb Shimon ben Pazi, I'm Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Mishum bar kapara, mayach, kol masha b'ktera. Anything that's in the kol masha b'ktera nidin kamayach. Anything that's in the skull is considered the brain, and therefore a puncture to the krum on any of that area is going to be treif. About the brain itself, it just said krum shel mayach. Krum shel mayach is a okay. Well, hischel limshech. Let's say there's a puncture to this membrane, but as the brain at the bottom of the neck at the neck, it starts to go into the spinal cord. So nidin kachut hashedra, that's already a different story. That's already the spinal cord. Now the spinal cord has to be severed in order for it to be a majority severed in order for it to be treif. Not just a puncture. So it's a different halacha, just like in the trachea and the lungs. It switches. There's a transition between a mashahu to rubai. Also by the brain, there's a transition from a mashu to rubai when it goes into the spinal cord. Where's it considered when it starts to go? Starts to be drawn out of the brain. Rabbi Shua ben Levi, that Rabbi Shua ben Levi explained it to me. This is always a statement in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, and Rabbi Shua ben Levi. It says, "Kamin shnei pulin." There's these two beans, yesh munach al pi kedera, that are at the entrance to the kedera means a pot, but over here it's talking about the skull. Min apulin relifnim kalifnim. Once those little beans, this the little, I'm not sure what they are. I'll say what they are. These beans are different explanations are offered to what these bean-like objects are. According to Rashi and Rambam, this refers to the occipital condyles. Am I saying it right? Condyles. Two projections of the skull on either side of the foramen magnum. The hole in the skull from which the spinal cord extends. Although birds have a single occipital condyle, it is sometimes cleft and may have been regarded as two separate protrusions. Others understand the meaning to refer to two clusters of nerve tissue at the back of the brain, apparently the two optic lobes, which are exposed in birds and roughly the size of a bean. Although in the mammalian brain, they are larger and hidden by the cerebrum.
Rabbi,
Yeah. Should I
let
give
me
up
just
on my medical thing?
just let me just make it easier. By the way, it's condyles. Is
Condyle.
yeah, they're talking about where we put the kesher of tefillin, of shel rush, right in the back there. That kind
Right
of
by the bone.
bony protuberance. Those are the occipital condyles, and obviously, you go a little lower, you feel your spine is attached there. It's kind of rotating, because we're on those balls, and of the C1, the first cervical as a thing sticking up in the middle, so you could turn, like no, and then it's got kind of ball joints, so you can go yes, but that's where the spine's coming through.
Okay.
So same thing on the animal. All right, goodbye. Sorry.
Okay. So from there and in, whatever these things are, occipital, whatever, that's inside. That's considered outside. And outside means that it's already the spine. But pulling I don't know exactly if it's exactly on the line. I don't know. Mistaber kilifnim, it's probably considered inside, which means it would be machmer. Rabbi Yirmiyah badak ba'if of ashkach kamin shnei pulim manacham piak there. Rabbi Yirmiyah checked a bird and he found the same thing. Same thing in a bird. You also have this occipital beans, condyles, and you found the same thing. Okay. Nikav alev lebeis chalale. If there's a hole in the heart to the, it's called the chamber, right, to the opening of the heart. If there's a hole, not the hole that's supposed to be there, not the pipes, but there's a hole through the tissue of the heart, that would be a problem. So by Rab Zir lebeis chalal katan lebeis chalal gadol, are we talking about to the small chamber to the large chamber? What's the word for them? Is there a word for them? The large chamber? Whatever. Amar le Abaya. Abaya says, "Mighty Bailach, what's your shaila?" Doesn't matter. Milay Tanan. We have a Mishnah. Reb Shimon Omer. It's not going to be some simpinus. We have a Mishnah that talks about the lungs, and when it comes to the lungs, actually, it wants to say it does matter. By the lungs, it says that the whole, according to Reb Shimon, has to go all the way to the what's it called, bronchial tubes. Amar Rabba bar Tachlifa, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Rabba, Amar Rab, Ad Shetinakiv l'Simpan Gadol. It says not just the bronchial tubes, because the bronchial tubes break off into smaller and smaller bronchi, but it has to go to the main one. So too, a hole in the heart has to go to the main chalal, the main chamber. It says Hachiyash, the hasam lebesim painas ketani. Over there it says beisasim painas. That means the house of the bronchi. So therefore, that's where all of them reach to. That's the one house which is the main one. But by the heart, it shouldn't matter if it's to the small chamber or to the larger chamber. Oh, this was always interesting, this Gemara. The kana of the heart. This should be the aorta. Right, the aorta. Let me see what's he puts it over there. Knei alev is the aorta, the chief artery. Rav Amar b'mashu Shmuel Amar berubai. Rav says that it's considered like the heart itself, and therefore a small puncture to the aorta would be a treifa. And Shmuel says no, it's not considered the heart itself. And therefore, it has to be severed into the majority in order for it to be a problem. Hainir Knei Halev. What is the Knei Halev? Amar Rabba bar Yitzchak Amar Rav Chelev shal gabi defanes. It's the fat that's on the flanks. Defanes al kadaita. That's on the flanks. Ella shal gabi doifnei reya. It's on the sides of the. It's I guess it's pressed against the lungs. Amar Rameimar Mishmeder Rav Nachman. Rameimar says, name of Nachman Tlasa Kanihavi. There's actually 3 pipes that are coming out from that place. Chad Parish Liba. One goes to the heart. I guess that's the aorta. It's Chad Parish Lareya. One goes to the lungs. That would be. Rashi says that sounds like the trachea, but it says v'heinhinas simpinus. Okay, v'chad parsh the kav, the one goes to the liver. The reya kireya, the one that goes to the reya has the halacha of the reya. The one that goes to the lungs has the halacha of the lungs, which means the small puncture is already treif. The kavda kekavda, the one that goes to the liver has a halacha of the liver, which the halacha of the liver is that even if the majority of the liver is removed, as long as there's a kazayas left, or maybe even a mashu, we had a machlekes about that, will it regenerate? It will still regenerate. The liba pligi, the machlekes is about the heart. That's a machlekes Rav and Shmuel, if the aorta is considered the heart or not, if it's punctured a small amount. Mar Barchia Masni Yipcha, the Reya Kikavda, the Kavda Kareya. Mar Barchia has it the opposite. He says the one that's going to the lungs has the halacha of the liver. Means that it's not a problem even if majority is missing. The Kavda Kareya, the one that's going to the liver has the halacha of the lungs, which means even a small puncture would be a problem. The Liba Pligi, the Machlekes is about the heart. So that everyone agrees. It's Machlekes about the aorta. Also, Rab Chia bar Yosef, Amar l'Shmaita, Kamei Tishmuel. Amr l'shmaita de Rav kamei de Shmuel. Apparently, Shmuel did not hear the teaching of Rav. Shmuel was in Nahardai. That's what Shmuel spoke about. Nihirin li shvili de Nahardai shvili de Rakia. Shmuel said that he knows the streets of the pathways of the heaven, just like the streets of the Nahardai. Nihirin shvili de Rakia kashvili de Nahardai. And Rav was in Surah. So not necessarily did the teachings of Rav make it all the way to Shmuel. So when you have a machlekes, each one might have said their thing, and only later on people put the two together and said, "Hey, we have a machlekes here. He says this, he says that." Doesn't mean that they were both in the beis medrash shouting. I say yes, and he says no. So Reb Chia Bar Yosef makes it to his way to Shmuel. He says over this teaching of Rav, Shmuel says, if that's what Rav says, then he doesn't know anything about treifus. Now, I read once an article in a periodical. It was called Asya. It's like a medical journal in Israel, and in there, someone was writing that Rav was not a student of medicine. He did his own research, and Shmuel was a doctor. So they claim that based on different statements of Shmuel, that Shmuel understood the body the way Galen understood it. So you say Galen, the way he understood the Greek doctor, and Rav actually had it more similar to the way that we understand the circulatory system and like that. And the reason why is because he wasn't relying on the doctor's teachings back then, which were mistaken. He was relying on his own research, which when you do your own research, you find different things than the way it's being taught. So, okay. So here Shmuel saying Rav doesn't know. It turns out that probably Rav knew from his own research. Okay. Whatever the case is, Nishbar Ashedra, if the spine is broken. So, now, what we say in Nishbar Shedra, we said, this is the actual spine. Then we have another one, V'nifsak achut shala. Oh, it's actually considered one thing. The spine is broken, and the spinal cord is as well. Okay. So, the Gemara says like this, Tzadar Rabbanan. Chut ha-shedra shenifsak berubai. Divri Rabbi. If it's majority, if the spine is majority severed, then that's a problem. That's a treifa. Rabbi Yaakov says even if there's a hole in the spinal cord, that's also a treifa. Rabbi actually paskin like Rabbi Yaakov. In other words, even though he had a more lenient opinion, he when it came to Lamaisi, he was strict. Amar Rav Huna says Ein halacha Rabbi Yaakov. Even though Rabbi paskins like Rabbi Yaakov, Rav Huna says we don't paskin like Rabbi Yaakov, we paskin like Rabbi, that it would have to be severed the majority. Kamarubai, how do you do the majority here? Rav Amar Reiv Oirei. Rav says the majority of the skin, I guess the circumference, that would be a problem. And Va'amila Rav Meiche, some say majority of the spinal cord. Is it marrow in the spinal cord? Because Meiche is usually translated as marrow.
I have no clue what those words mean.
Spinal cord doesn't contain marrow.
Bones
contain marrow. Spinal cord contains a cerebral spinal fluid.
So here he calls it nerve tissue.
Yeah, CSF, cerebral spinal fluid.
Okay. So it's a fluid? Is the spinal cord fluid? Or is it what's inside it?
Wait, the spinal cord itself is nerves. I mean, it's one giant nerve that then at the bottom breaks in the cauda equina, that horse's tail. No, but it's surrounded by fluid, and
really?
it's all encased in this dura, which is like this saran wrap that kind of holds it all in.
So here there's a discussion about what you're calling dura, which is the casing. It has to be when it's severed. So when severed in the majority, we're talking about that the casing is severed, or are we talking about the fluid that's inside or the nerve tissue that's inside. That's the
Well,
machlok.
if you case the if you cut the dura, it's like cutting a tire. The air's going to go out. The fluid
Right,
goes out.
right,
Yes.
right. So that's now take a look at this. So it says Mandam Arayv Maichai Kolskin Rayvayray. The one that says that if it's treif, even if the inside is cut, so for sure the outside's cut because everything's going to leak out. That's the end of it. The Mandam Rayvayray, the one that says if the outside is cut, then Rav Maichai Mai, what would he say about the other opinion if there was a scenario where just the inside was severed but not the outside? So Tashema, the Amar Niuli or Nivli, this is a new name for us. I don't think we have them anywhere else. Nivli or Niuli. Amar Rav Huna. This Niuli or Nivli said the name of Rav Huna. Rubai Shamru Rayvayray. Mayach Zel Mayrid. The main thing is the outside membrane of the spinal cord, not what's inside. What's inside doesn't matter. That's an expression. It doesn't do the good. It doesn't do bad. It's insignificant. Well, Rav Nassan bar Ravin Havi Yasel Kamid Rav. He was in front of Rav and he was checking an animal. What's about this? Checking the spinal cord. Checked the majority of the skin to see, and he checked the majority of the inside if it was severed. Rav tells him, you don't have to worry about the inside. If the outside is good, that was not going to matter. There's two expressions over here of the inside becoming like liquefied. One means nismarich, they're translating as liquefied. And nismasmes means it was softened. Ezu amracha, what does it mean liquefied? Liquefaction, that's a fancy word. Vezam sasa, what is the softening? So hamracha, liquefaction, is kol shenishbach kitisain. If it would pour out like a liquid, like the way you would pour from a jug. And masmasa, this softening is kol shenech lamed. It means if you would put it down on the table, it would like fall over, like limp. It can't stand on its own. It would sag. Rabbi Yirmiyah has a question. Let's say it's not because of its liquefied, it's not because it got softened, but it can't stand because of its weight. What would be the halacha? Teku. We don't know an answer. He introduces another word over here. Beirav says nismasmis, which nismasmis means if it's softened, he said that's puzzle. But nismasmis, this is due to disease, softened due to disease, that's going to be kosher. Meisvi, there's a question from Shimon ben Elazar, an animal that the brain was diseased and it got soft because of that, or was emptied. But here, when it says maicha, it's not actually, maicha sounds like the brain. It actually means the inner, the nerve tissue of the spinal cord. Beimashin is maicha of the spinal cord. It says treifa. You told me before from the house of Rav that it's going to be kosher. Turns out Reb Shimon ben Elazar was a Tana, a student of Reb Meir, says that it's a treifa. Umar says that's easy to correct, because that's easy to resolve that problem because we just correct the girsa. And instead of saying nismazmes, we say nismasmes, which means that it's softened. We said that was a problem. Aini, is that really so? Well, Levi Haviyasa Bein Masuta. Levi was sitting in the bathhouse. Chazilu Gavra the Tarya Reshi. He saw someone that banged his head. Amar, he says, Nismasmes Meichadadein. Put that Nebuch, that fellow, his brain is Nismasmes, which we said was like softened by disease. Why did Levi say, like, oh, poor fellow? Why did he say that? Obviously, he's not going to live. That's what he meant. Which means Nismasmes is a problem. It meant that since he had that brain injury, he won't be able to reproduce. Okay, that's what Levi meant. Ad heichen chut hashedra. How far down does the spine go? It goes all the way down. If we had tails, it would go probably into the tail. But how far down does it go? So it turns out that it splits off in different areas, and there's going to be 3 spots where it splits off. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Ad Bein HaPrashos. It goes until it starts to branch out. Rav Dimi Bar Yitzchak Havi Kaboy Lemezel Bechuzai. Rav Dimi Bar Yitzchak was going to go to Bechuzai. That's a place, and here they put it close to Shushan. Kuzestan is Bechuzai. Anyway, Asal Kamid Rabbi Yehuda comes to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was in Pumbedisa. Amalei, he says to him, I gotta know this halacha. I'm gonna go away. I'm gonna go on a trip. I have to know what to do. Where's the bein precious? Where's the part of the animal where it starts to branch out? The spine branches out as it gets to the towards the hip. Amalei, he says, bring me a goat. I'll show you. He brought him a nice fat goat. Amalei, you can't see it from here, because it's so absorbed in the fat that I can't show you where it's split. It's where it's split, where it's branching out. So Isley Kachash, he brought him another goat. This one was a very lean goat. So Amalei Blitan Tfevelei, he says this one's too lean, and the bones are stuck together. You can't see it where it's coming out. It gets too thin as the bones are pushing against each other. Amalei Ta Gamrach Gemara. He says, look, I can't show it to you, but at least I'll tell you the halacha. Hachi Amar Shmuel Ad Achas Treifa. Until the first split, that's the spinal cord is 100% the spinal cord. First branching out, and that's going to be the first branches. That's going to be a treifa if it's severed. Shlishis, by the third time it branches over there, then it doesn't matter. That's ksheira. Shniya Eini Edeya. The middle one, I don't know. There's apparently there's 3. And the first one would be a treifa if it's severed. The third one doesn't matter, and in the middle, the second one he doesn't know the answer. Apparently, damage to the spinal cord would affect whatever part of the body is below that. I think that's how it works. So if it's coming out already by the tail, then it doesn't matter. But before that, it would affect if the animal can stand. Boy, Rav Huna Breder of Yeshua. Rav Huna Breder of Yeshua has a question. Ad vad b'chlal, idilma ad v'le'ad b'chlal. We're on top of Membav. What does it mean until the first one, until the second one, until the third one? It says, are we including the first branch or not? Idilma ad v'le'ad b'chlal. Or does it end right by the branch, not including where it branches out? What about that area itself? Rav Papa has a question. If you say that it's not including it, so pi prashamahu. What about if it was cut on the mouth of the first branch? Here we're talking about ad v'loyad b'chlal. It's not including the first branch. So at that spot, that's not including the first branch, but right above it, would that be a problem? It doesn't answer the question. Is it considered the ad, or is it considered before the ad? Because we know that the ad isn't ad. Ad means until. Is it until not included? Because it's until not including. So is it the not included part, or is it above it? Let's say that you go the opposite. Let's say you are including the branching. So prasha atzma mahu. Let's say the branch itself, let's say that first branch, what happens there if you cut it? If it was severed. Tashima says haprasha tidin kabasar. Says the branches are considered like regular flesh. That's not going to make it a treifa. My love, prasha rishon v'shniya. It must mean We're talking about the first one and the second one, which we said the second one we didn't know what the halacha was, but the first one we said if the spinal cord was severed there, it would be a treifa. But after it branches out, we're saying it's the flesh. We said lo yishlishis. No, the flesh we're talking about by the third one, which didn't matter anyway. Question is like, so what's the chiddush? I don't know. But what about by a bird? Below the wings, his Rabbi Yane's opinion would be a problem. Rish Lakish says until the wings. But below them would not be a problem. Amar Ula. Ula says, I was standing in front of Ben Pazi. I brought him a bird. And and he checked it until the wings. That's similar to the to Rish Lakish. Shalach lei the bein asiya v'kam v'azal. So someone came from the bein asiya to get him. This has been Pazi. And he got up and he went. I don't know if he left because he left because you don't have to actually check anymore. Or he left because he was in a rush and the Nasi called him, he had to go. So I don't know what if he paskin like Rabbi Rish Lakish or he paskin like Rabbi Yanai, how far on the bird you have to check. Okay, the next Gemara is about the liver. So we'll take us through a little bit. Let's leave it over here. Okay, have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.